In today's video, we're going to zero a 50 million power player who betrayed us. They switched alliances, they put themselves on a 24-hour teleport cooldown, and didn't bother to use a peace shield. So yeah, of course we went over to the Traitor City and went to zero them. So stick around in this video for a few reports, and we can analyze critically what you might do differently to get a better result. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and at this point, it's no secret that we've been betrayed in Call of Dragons multiple seasons in a row. And I won't revisit in this video how betraying is the meta in this game and why I think it's critical for the health of the game that ultimately that changes. I think the developers are likely to make that change, but I've covered that extensively in other videos. I'll have cards in the end screen so you can check that out. But the background story here that you need to know is that we've got a pretty bitter rivalry against DNS, who is even trying to sort of scum their way into our starting zone by asking people to hand over their shells, and they want to give us literally nowhere to live for the remainder of the season, and that is still many weeks. So this player left our alliance and joined their alliance. So obviously that's not okay. Now, as a reminder, when you leave your alliance and join another one, you get put on a teleport cooldown. You can't teleport for a certain amount of time. When you're City Hall 25, that amount of time is 24 hours, a full day. So this player was still on our territory, and they were rallyable, and they didn't bother to use a peace shield. So, yeah, we're going to zero them. And their wall was surprisingly good, considering that I don't think they were actually set up to take a rally on their city. And we'll talk later on a little bit about that. So I rally this player, and also Mithurian rallies this player. And what's interesting about this is that he uses Kanara with Hosk, and he gets about a 2-for-1 trade in his favor in terms of dead troops, which is pretty good considering that you got to remember cities take only 10% of the casualties that a rally takes, right? So this rally is doing extremely well, and I would attribute that in no small amount to the fact that the Rattle Spear, which is what Mithurian is using, has a passive ability that is actually super relevant here. Now, you could see that I was positioned to actually reinforce that rally, and it looked like I had infantry commanders on the field. Why is that? I wanted to put experience on my infantry commanders, but I did have archers in the march, but I needed to bring a smaller march if I actually wanted to get into that rally. So takeaway there is that when you have complete control like this, we were not taking that much damage to the rally. So I go and I set a rally with Sindri and Freygar. Now, there's a couple problems with this rally. First of all, there's not actually a good artifact for the Sindri and Freygar. So they release Sindri and Freygar, and they're like, hey, yo, Sindrian's a rally commander. Except they didn't release a good artifact for rallying for Sindrian. We have a Freygar artifact that will, when activated, apply a net onto somebody and do some extra damage, but that doesn't work in a rally context. You need passive benefits and buffs, and this doesn't have any, unlike the Rattle Spear. So although my Gold Crest is maxed out, so we're doing 7.5% more damage and taking 7.5% less damage, I think it's possible that a Blood Blade banner, if maxed, would be better. So definitely food for thought there. And it is just weird that we have Sindrian, who's a rally commander, but no artifact to actually support a Sindrian rally. I imagine that at some point they might release an artifact for that, but to be determined, honestly. So we go for about a 2-for-1 trade here as well, which is why I highlighted how impressive it was that Mithurian's rally with the Kanara Hosk had done so well. And I really think that the passive benefits of the Rattle Spear and also being able to use the pet associated with doing defense breaks is just really, really good. Even though he wasn't using Nico Kanara, or actually, no. Did I say Hosk? Actually, I think it was Nico and Kanara, but Kanara was the primary? I don't know. We'll have to go take a closer look at that and see. But regardless, yeah, I think it was Nico. Nico's actually insane, by the way. We'll look at his awakening skill. Whenever there's a defense break, he does 80% chance of 200 damage factor. Nico's nuts. I also think Hosk would have been pretty good too, but whatever. So now folks are swarming the city. I actually would have been happy to just keep rallying the city. This guy was obviously not online. But there is an element of speed associated with like, hey, let's just zero this guy as fast as we can before he figures out he needs to bubble. I mean, at this point, I don't know, we've been rallying the dude for like 20 minutes. Like, I feel like if they were going to figure it out, they'd have figured it out. But folks go in for the swarm, and that thing's getting swarmed down. So we're going to review these reports and talk about things that I think would make the rally perform better. And although my Sindri and Freygar is really strong, and my Sand Lizard is like really strong, I think that in this situation, even though I was never expecting to be a rally lead in this game, I'll be honest with you, not only is there just not that much rallying to do, but also I kind of expected like other people would be doing it. But like there are things that you really kind of don't want for a rally that are great in the open field, but less relevant in a rally. And, one of those things we're going to talk about is healing. Healing is really cool for a rally, except you can get the same effect just by having somebody else join the rally with more troops. By the way, Kevin is down to like 213,000 dead troops here. So he's had quite a few dead troops. All of that wasn't from this particular set of rallies, but a non-trivial amount of his dead troops here, at least half, probably more, is coming from these rallies and swarms on his city. So he's now down to 42 million power from about 50 million power. My last rally did about 13,000 to 33,000 dead troops. And all in all, I think these results are okay, but let's go look at these reports. So at a glance, you can kind of see why I'm like, oh, I see why Chisgule wants to use his Sand Lizard. That's got a lot of skills on it, and it does. But first, let's talk about Kevin's defense. He's got the Madeline Garwood combo. And amazingly, he's got the Fang of Ashkari, which gives a global defense boost. It doesn't care about a troop type. So unlike other artifacts that care about like infantry or cavalry, etc., this is actually a very good artifact, assuming that he's got a nice skill level. Well, not skill level, a nice level on his artifact overall. He's getting some good defensive stats, and that's universal. I think the Madeline for defending your city is okay. I wouldn't call it particularly special, especially because it's doing area of effect damage, which in this case, I think a few people did get clipped by area of effect damage, but you'd really rather do like fully single target stuff. Plus, Madeline has a skill committed to the open field. Extra troop capacity and extra damage when you're in the field. So she's not an ideal candidate for defending your city, but she does work. And Garwood actually is a kind of ideal candidate, but he doesn't even have all the skills unlocked. So even just unlocking the last skill would be pretty legit in this context. I mean, it just gives you value, right? And then he's got the Frost Bear, which like, okay, if you're using Madeline, having a Frost Bear is fine. He's got a passive skill here, 0 star. That is going to do some damage, but he's also got this thing, Super Fierce Attack, which is completely irrelevant. Maybe this was already on his pet. Like I said, I don't think he was expecting to get hit here. This defense says to me, I was not prepared. In terms of the rally here, Sindrian and Freygar, like, obviously is supposed to be good for rallying. I mean, Sindrian has a skill committed to rallying, specifically. So it's actually not rallying, it's besieging, which I assume means attacking or rallying. I don't know why they have introduced this word besieging when it would be maybe more clear with like attacking or rallying, if that's what they mean, just specifically rallying. I just would assume this works if you're swarming or rallying. Anyways, I've got the gold crest, and as I described, like it's a cute stat stick, but it isn't doing any abilities at all that support the rally. Now, the Fang of Ashkari also has no abilities that is supporting the garrison, but still, it would be nice to have some passive benefits. And then I've got my Sand Lizard, which is like really kind of over the top. And I'll show you this Sand Lizard. Best way to do that is probably to just visit my pets. I'm going to be making a dedicated video about the Sand Lizard, so consider subscribing if you haven't already, and you're interested in seeing kind of what that looks like. But my Sand Lizard is pretty cracked. It's got intelligence and agility really high. Unfortunately, strength is not, but this thing is basically done. I would probably just work on another pet before I try to improve this Sand Lizard. And what is here that's so good? Well, first of all, my crit damage is boosted when doing normal attacks, which is insane for Sindrian and Freygar. This is really great. Big downside of that is that unfortunately the strength is low. So this could be twice as strong with a higher strength roll. GG. The Sand Lizard does a healing effect, and I mentioned that healing is not actually helpful for rallying. The reason is very obvious to understand. I mean, you could just put more troops into the rally, and that has the same effect of healing, basically. Not exactly, but basically. So I actually think that the Sand Lizard is not a good candidate for running a rally, but because at this moment in my account's development, it is just so leaps and bounds above kind of the other pets I think it could have used, like, yeah, I think it's the right thing for me to be using in this instance. Now, from there, I've got Fierce Attack. I mean, this is just adding a bunch of damage, which you love to see. So we add that Fierce Attack, even though my strength roll is not amazing, it is what it is. I've got Chain Strike running. Chain Strike makes it so that I have a chance to do additional damage when I do normal attacks. This is a 1-star ability. And Chain Strike is really crazy here because Sindrian does 2 normal attacks per turn. So on average, I should be triggering this not once a turn, because like that's technically the most I could trigger it, but like this triggers a lot because I'm getting double normal attacks. And tied into that is Steadfast Chain Strike, which is giving me healing based on my damage whenever I cast Chain Strike. And when I do 3 Chain Strikes, I do more damage factor over here. So I got a lot of ways that I'm cranking out damage. Of course, I'm not even done. I do have a strength-based ability here giving me some defense penetration, so I can get in some extra damage. And last but not least, Eviscerate gives me a crit rate boost when dealing physical normal attacks. And this is valuable because when Sindrian and Freygar crit a bunch of times with normal attacks, you do extra damage. Okay? So this Sand Lizard is pretty good, although I would still say the Sand Lizard is not ideal. So what Mithurian was using is actually surprisingly good. And why is that? So we need to look at Nico and Kanara, and specifically the Rattle Spear. And the Rattle Spear does some cool stuff. Although its active ability is fine in combat, the passive, when your Legion inflicts a defense break on the enemy Legion, you gain defense penetration 20%, ignoring the enemy's defense for 7 seconds. It's a big, big, big buff. So this is a very powerful effect, especially because Nico has a defense break. Kanara, when awakened, she's got a defense break. So you're doing defense breaks all the time. And whenever you do a defense break, when you're using a Snow Peak Rock, which you should be, then you do extra damage potentially as well. 30% chance to deal that damage. So this is really powerful as a combination. And the passive benefits that you get here from this artifact are actually really important and very good. The other thing I'll point out, dude, whenever you have defense break on a target, Nico has an 80% chance to do 200 skill damage. That adds up fast, okay? That adds up really fast. Every 5 seconds, you're doing 800 damage factor. You see what? That's a big deal. Like, this Awakening skill is busted when you pair with Kanara, which is what I think you should do, and a Snow Peak Rock. You're just cruising, man. You're freaking cruising. So I think that the Nico and Kanara combo might actually be a better rally than Sindri and Freygar, purely because of this Rattle Spear over here. So how could I have improved my rally? Well, if I had a different pet, perhaps the situation would have been better. What pet would you use is kind of a weird one. Like, maybe it's a Berserk Phaedrake, but I'm not entirely convinced that that's amazing. Maybe it's a Goldenrock, but like, yet again, I'm not entirely convinced that's amazing because you're not getting passion anywhere. So I'm not entirely sure that there's really an ideal pet here for this particular context. And that's why I went with the Sand Lizard on the Sindri and Freygar. The other thing, as I sort of mentioned, is that, okay, there's no passive benefits on this. So, what could I do instead? And that brings me to the Blood Blade Banner, which I actually think is generally not amazing. But if we look at what this does, it gives you Rallied Army attack and defense. It's going to give you only 5% damage taken mitigation and damage dealt boost. But at least there's also a passive buff here. So every 30 seconds, you do an upwards of 1,300 damage factor. And that ain't much. I mean, it's a small amount of damage factor per second, but you also get a physical attack boost of 10% for 10 seconds. So I actually think that if I had a max Bloodblade banner, this probably would be better. And even at 4 skills, it might have been better. So at the sort of cost of 2.5% damage dealt and 2.5% less damage taken, so a 5% all damage differential, sort of, you gain the 1,300 damage factor every 30 seconds and 10% attack every 30 seconds for 10 seconds. I think the Bloodblade banner actually ends up being better in that weird context, even though normally I would say that it's not. And as I mentioned earlier, with regard to the dude defending his city, I thought the Fang of Ashkari was actually pretty good. Legion defense and Legion defense is pretty legit here. Actually, I think it was a happy accident for them that they were set up that way, right? Like, I think that they just don't have the more obvious sort of general better choice, the Dragon Scale armor. And because they didn't have that, boom. Now, this is kind of interesting. Passive. Your Legion gains ranged resistance when the wielder gets a shield through rage skills. I don't actually know how this works when you're getting rallied by archers. Like, you're not actually getting attacked at range at that point, but I would assume that it counts as ranged damage taken mitigation. I don't actually know. Definitely leave a comment down below for how you think that actually works. So, all in all, do I like the idea that we're like rallying people who've quit our alliance to join an enemy alliance? No. Do I think that that's probably a correct thing to be doing? I mean, like, yeah, I think it is correct, especially given that, you know, last I heard, they're actively trying to scum their way into our starting zone by taking over an alliance and offering the leaders of that alliance in our starting zone, you know, a bunch of rewards that they wouldn't have had access to otherwise, right? And, you know, it's funny, I mentioned that in my last video, and a ton of people reached out, and they're like, let me advocate against that scummy behavior, because I think it's scummy too. And these are people in MF and DNS. So I think there's enough people over there that think that that kind of behavior is kind of scummy, that, like, maybe that's not going to happen. And maybe it won't happen just because the alliance leader's in our zone. Maybe we'll just not allow it, but I don't know, man. We'll see. If you want to see these betrayal videos that I was talking about, cards will be in the end screen in just a second. One of those videos actually is going to be less about betrayal and more about how I would improve the game. The other one will give you the full scoop, though. Until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.